diplomatically and that visit. Thanks very much, James Landale there. Now, as I said in the past few minutes, the public inquiry into the Post Office Horizon IT scandal has published the first part of its final report. And this is looking at the human impact of what is widely believed to be one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in UK history. Thousands of sub-postmasters were wrongly accused of stealing from their own branch accounts when a faulty computer system was actually to blame. More than 230 sub-postmasters were sent to prison. Now, Nick Wallace is author of The Great Post Office Scandal, who is at the inquiry in London. Nick, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you from a very sunny oval cricket ground. It seems like quite an incongruous setting for the release of this report, but it's where we had some compensation hearings a couple of years ago, so I guess it was appropriate to come back here to see the report drop.
Absolutely. And have you had eyes on it?
Yeah, it's a huge report. It's more than 100 pages, and bearing in mind that this is only going to be a tiny fraction of the final report, it covers 19 recommendations and also deals with the human impact side of things. And for the first time, the inquiry chair has calculated that 13 people have directly been affected by the scandal, have taken their own lives as a result of coming into contact with the Horizon IT system. And it's the first time that that number has been published and officially endorsed. And the way they came to that figure was by asking the Post Office, who had received applications for compensation via family members of those who had taken their own lives. The inquiry chair, Sir Win Williams, asked them to tally up exactly how many people had actually taken their own lives, or who their family believed had taken their own lives as a direct result of this. So now we're looking at 13 people in that position, and a further 59 who have contemplated or attempted suicide as a result of this scandal. So it's not just the widespread nature of the scandal, it's the fact that so many people have been affected to the extent where they felt they could no longer go on living.
In terms of apportioning blame in this part of the report, what is Sir Win Williams's attitude to that, or stance on this?
Accountability is not what this report is about. He's deliberately separated that out, and he's leaving that for his final report. This report is trying to bring home the scale of the suffering, and there are lots of case studies of sub-postmasters, including people like Simon Cameron and Deirdre Connolly, people who have appeared in the media and some people who haven't, and he lays out some of the worst cases that he's come across, because he sees compensation and human impacts as two sides of the same coin. The only reason there is compensation is because of the scale of suffering that has been involved. So there's that part of the report, and the second part of the report are his recommendations on compensation. Some of them are quite technical, but some of the most striking are that the compensation schemes, and there are quite a few of them which are changing shape, even it seems as we speak, and they've been in existence, some of them, for 5 years now. But the compensation schemes he recommends should be extended to family members of those affected by the Horizon scandal. Now, this will be great news for the sons and daughters of sub-postmasters, so many of whom have been directly affected by what was happening, so many of them who've had their future life chances curtailed as a result of what happened to their parents and been traumatized as a result. So now this across-the-board recommendation that it doesn't matter which compensation scheme you might be eligible for, it should be extended to family members as well. He's also put in a really big recommendation that the government should establish a standing public body which should administer and deliver compensation schemes for providing financial redress to people who have been wronged by public bodies. Because this scandal has been dogged by the inept approach to compensation by both the Post Office and the government, and also if we look at other scandals like the Windrush scandal or the infected blood scandal, Sir Win Williams is saying, look, this has to stop somewhere. We have to have a statutory body that will administer compensation for other scandals going forward.
When you say inept, obviously the government isn't here to respond, but I mean, I can understand in terms of the Post Office and how they went about finding this out, but what when you say inept in terms of the government, what do you mean?
Well, initially, the government insisted that the post office should be administering the compensation scheme. And this was something that came out in the evidence of the former chief executive of the post office, Nick Reed. He said, we wanted nothing to do with compensations. We didn't feel qualified to do it. But Treasury officials said that we need to soak up some of the pain. Now, that is not a good way to set up a compensation scheme. The post office were wholly unprepared to do it properly. And as a result, the initial scheme that they set up, the Horizon shortfall scheme, has gone through so many iterations and changes and is probably, or was actually independently described as the worst of the compensation schemes by the Horizon Compensation Advisory Board. That scheme is now moving into the control of the government, as many people say it should have been all along. But there are other compensation schemes as well. There's the Sir Alan Bates compensation scheme, the GLO scheme, which was set up specifically for the 555 sub-postmasters who initially took the post office to the High Court. And you've also got the overturned conviction scheme, which has been merged with another scheme which was given to those who got their convictions quashed through the legislation, which happened last year. And there are so many disparities and discrepancies between the schemes that a lot of this report is quite technical in that it's aimed in sort of redressing the balance and the discrepancies within those or between those schemes in order to make them a lot fairer. One of the most significant points, though, in this is there was a horrible jeopardy rule whereby there was a flat amount of settlement available to sub-postmasters, £600,000 if they had their convictions quashed, or £75,000 if they were applying through the shortfall scheme, which was for non-convicted sub-postmasters. But if they decided to go and have their claims assessed, they lost the right to that fixed sum. So if their assessments came in lower than that fixed sum, there was a jeopardy involved. Now, the recommendation of this report and all the findings by Sir Win Williams are just recommendations. He can't compel the government to do anything. The key recommendation in that area is that if you opt to go for assessment or an assessed claim and it comes out lower than what would have been your fixed sum, you can take the fixed sum. So that removes some of the jeopardy.
I think you've got some reading to do, Nick.
Yeah, it's a big report. I'm just looking at it now, 164 pages. I've skimmed through most of it, and those are the headline recommendations. But yeah, there's a lot more in here.
Yeah, we'll get lots of detail. It's brilliant of you to talk to us about this, as you just got hands on it. So thank you. It's Nick Wallace, author of The Great Post Office Scandal, who's at the inquiry and looking at the findings. The first part of this final report by Sir Win Williams, who we are expecting to speak at 12:30, and we will bring to you. I'm also joined by Tim Brentle, who's a former sub-postmaster from Pembrokeshire. Tim was prosecuted in the year 2010 after a £22,000 shortfall was discovered at his branch, and his conviction was overturned in 2021. Tim, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Naya.
What are your reactions to what you are hearing from this first part of the final part?
Well, being on the inside of this story, nothing has surprised me in this. It's very good to read the concerns that we've had over the last number of years there on paper in front of us. Sir Win's highlighted the fact that this is taking far too long. I remember actually this time 4 years ago with Nick outside the High Court when we spoke to you on your programme, and we were told at that point, having our convictions quashed, life would look very different. Here we are 4 years later and not a lot has changed.
You're still going through the legal process, aren't you? To be compensated. Can you just explain it is long, what that has involved?
So I spent a long time with my legal team building a claim which was served on the post office last summer, and we had to wait for them to come back with an offer just before Christmas last year, but their offer came in at 17% of my claim, which, as Nick highlighted, was below the fixed offer I could have walked away with initially.
And what were you entitled to, the 75,000 or the 600,000?
600,000 because I had a conviction.
Because you had a conviction.
Yeah.
So 17% of what you were entitled. I mean, how does anyone say this is what you lost? It was wrong. You lost it, but we're only going to give you 17% of it.
Exactly. The numbers aren't picked out of the air by me. It's not a dream or fluff. The claim is put together by forensic accountants and legal team, and they present a very cold, light of day figure that says this is what this has cost you. And the Post Office, because it was being handled by them at that point, used every opportunity to minimise that claim. If we weren't able to evidence things from things that happened 15 years ago, then they denied those aspects of the claim. We've now spent the last 6 months rewriting the claim to try and answer those questions, and it will now be served directly on the government. But again, there's nothing that says that they have to honour that. Parts of the report that Sir Wyn's done talks about the full and fair redress. It's a phrase that they love to use, but he highlights that no one's actually defined what that means. Full and fair to me could mean something very different to you, and it definitely means something very different to the government or the Post Office. And he's highlighting, saying that needs to be defined so that we have a framework to work from. But that's 4 years after convictions were overturned that we've got to that point where someone's realised that no one's actually defined what full and fair means.
As a journalist, I've followed this, obviously, and I talk about the first part of the final part of the inquiry. And, for us, it's almost like these are diary, things that happen in the diary, and we know they've affected people's lives, and we know these are really important. But you are living this every minute of every day. What is the toll of that on you?
It's draining. We fought the Post Office for nearly a decade. Alan got our case over the line to a settlement in 2019. When you think you're going to be able to start to move on, you then go through a few years of criminal appeals to get convictions overturned. Following our initial 100 appeals that we got through in 2021, we were always told by government that it's a legal process and everybody with a conviction has to go through the courts because government can't interfere with the judiciary. Following a TV drama last year, the public support that we had meant within a week they decided to legislate that convictions all, as a blanket, could be overturned. So if there was a will to compensate everybody fully, I'm sure they could do it with the stroke of a pen rather than drawing it out. As Nick said, we've seen in the report today that 13 people have taken their own lives due to this. We can't also forget, out of all of the group of people involved in this, we've had nearly 350 deaths, not of suicide. People have died while they're waiting for compensation. I'm in my mid-40s, so I can play perhaps a longer game or a waiting game and can afford to let it play out. But many of my sub-postmaster or ex-sub-postmaster friends that I speak to are much later in life, and they or their partners or family members have health scares, and people end up accepting percentages of what they're due because they want to draw a line under it and be able to move on with their lives without thinking of the Post Office and this battle every day, and that's just not fair.
No, absolutely not. The next part of this inquiry, the second part of the report on how this all came about, how it actually happened, may not come around until 2026. How important is that part of the report to you? And, you will be having to wait at least another year.
It's really important. We need accountability. Post Office, government, people love to say this can't happen again, but without accountability and people having to answer for decisions that they've made or the trauma that they've put people through, then why wouldn't it happen again? If people don't have to answer for their decisions, then they're free to make these horrible decisions that affect people's lives in this massive way. Bringing those people in front of court, we're told, could take another year or two following the end of the inquiry. So we're looking at 2028 until people are actually starting to be held accountable for their decisions. We were sort of dragged into the courts like rabbits in headlights. People were forced to like I was, to plead guilty to false accounting, to try and use the system to stay out of prison. People were offered false accounting pleas instead of theft charges because it lessened their chances of having custodial sentences. We had no time to prepare or think for it, and we were just sort of railroaded through the system. So we really need people that made these decisions or turned a blind eye or allowed these things to go on to be held accountable as well.
There is this idea of this compensation body now that is in charge, so that you don't get through this drawn-out process that, for example, you're going through. Is that one positive step? What other positive steps do you think, practical positive steps, could be taken on the back of this report?
Well, yeah, the public body for compensation is a very good idea, because it's absolutely horrific. If you think that the people that prosecuted me ruined my business and my life, I've had to go and approach them for my compensation. Many of the people that made decisions about our legal cases are still employed in the post office and dealing with the subject of the compensation. It's just horrific. The rest of the report really highlights how slow things are. At one point I picked out was Sir Wynne said he'd made a recommendation and nothing happened for 12 months. Only when he called it back again that was put into place. So why was it allowed to sit for 12 months without people moving on very sensible ideas?
Will you get your hands on the report today and have a look? What is it like when you kind of go through this and read it?
Well, Sir Wynne has from the very beginning given all of us confidence that he appreciates the scale and the problems and the human cost and every other cost that this has forced on our lives. So we were quite able to predict what he might say, and it's nice. Nice isn't perhaps the word. It's good to read that the way that you feel and the way that you've experienced things is there in front of you, and someone with the intelligence and the understanding of Sir Wynne can see it and puts it down on paper. It gives us another stick to push the government, because all schemes, even when I was applying to the post office for compensation, that still had to be signed off by the Treasury anyway. So the government hold the purse strings on all of it. They just need to move quicker, because people will continue to die if this doesn't happen, and people should get their redress before they're in that position.
Tim, I wish you and I had never had to speak, but whenever I do speak to you, I get a great deal of information from a pragmatic but obviously frustrated person. But I wish you well, as I always do, and thank you for talking to us here on 5 Live. The government is going to give its response to the inquiry report this afternoon in the House of Commons. There will be a statement from the Post Office Minister, Gareth Thomas. Also, we will be hearing from